We have footage of Ukraine using JDAMs for the very first time. These are pictures of 4 American-given Ukrainian JDAMs striking Russian ammunition depot in Bakhmut. I saw the video. The explosions are magnificent. And looking at the outcome, they were very precise. JDAM costs about 30,000 USD a piece. It's a kit that is attached to a dumb bomb to make it guidable through air. It glides through air very precisely to the target. It follows the coordinates. 30,000 military-wise is quite a cheap weapon. And Russians are lacking munitions in Bakhmut, so this is a very expensive loss for them. In this video we can see 10 Leopard 2A4 tanks in Ukraine in a training ground. They have Ukrainian crews on them. It's a beautiful sight. They're getting ready for the counter-offensive. Now that Ukraine has Western armor, and a lot of it, believe me, they have so much of it. We're talking about hundreds, not tens. Challengers, Leopards, Oshkosh, all of the different ACPs that I cannot even count because there's so many different variants they have. The biggest problem is going to be to break through the Russian minefields. Russians have dug a lot of trenches and they have a 3-layer defense. And they have mined the area in front of their trenches and in front of their defensive lines to oblivion. It's so heavily mined. You cannot just drive over it. You gotta clear it. Yes, Germany and other NATO countries have provided Ukraine with anti-mining vehicles, mine-clearing vehicles, but all of this has to be done under fire, presumably, if Russians don't just run away. Well, they might, because Ukrainian information operations are trying to do just that. But if they don't, if they stay and fight, all of these mines have to be cleared under fire. And all of this Western tech has to be funneled through this one cleared path. So wherever the Ukrainians attack, it has to be fast, precise, effective, and if a bottleneck forms, it's gonna be a huge issue. For example, the Russians have this Meteorit vehicle which shoots a string, explosive string, about 100-150 meters, which explodes and clears a 10 meters path for you. Ukrainians, of course, have the Western equivalent of the same vehicle, but that path is very narrow. And it's under fire that the armored vehicles have to follow that path through the Russian defensive lines. And unfortunately, Russian Kornet, which is effective enough to destroy a tank if it hits one. So the counteroffensive is not just pushing these hundreds of Western ACPs onto Russian positions. It is bombarding these positions, keeping the Russians down, then clearing the mines very fast and effectively, and then pushing through the armored units with infantry support. Infantry has to support the vehicles, otherwise they're just sitting ducks. Russians have been using their vehicles just in a convoy without infantry support, and they're sitting ducks, they're easy. It's a turkey shoot for Ukrainians. And now we're talking only about the first defensive line. Then there will be the second one and the third one. But hopefully, if the Ukrainian information operations are successful and the first defensive line is breached, the second and the third one might collapse. I mean, Russian morale is low enough. If they get pushed a little bit, they might run. We saw that 2 times already with the Kharkiv front and with the Kherson front. Ukraine is trying to pull it off for the 3rd time. This is a photo of all of the Russian trenches built in the occupied territories. And note that most dense trench areas are in the south. This is because the Russians think that Ukrainians will attack from the south. I think they will attack from the south. I guess everybody thinks they will attack from the south. This fact alone tells us that Ukraine might not attack from the south, because everybody is expecting them to attack from the south. But Russians have also built trenches elsewhere. For example, the left bank of the Dnipro river. Let's watch a satellite video of it. This here is the Dnipro river, and these are the Russian trenches on the left bank, the Russian occupied side of the river. And we can see they're not built straight. Well, a few points there. That means Russians are afraid of the amphibious landings over the Dnipro. And these trench lines are long. I don't know if they have troops to man these lines. Russians have built more trenches than they have troops to man them. That's why they use conscripts. But yeah, they look solid lines. They look solid trenches. Every time Russians lose an armored personnel carrier, infantry fighting vehicle, a tank, they have to take from a stockpile that is very finite. They're bringing out their older tech like T-55s, T-54s. We have seen them now, we have photo proof of these tanks being on the battlefield. With Ukraine, it's the opposite. Western tech has been arriving. For example, this is the entirely new Ukrainian 37th Separate Marine Infantry Brigade. They have Oshkosh, as you can see, American new vehicles that even some of the American units don't have yet. They have the AMX-10, totally equipped with Western armor. These will be the assault brigades that the Russian soldier, which is in one of those trenches we just watched, will be seeing advancing towards them. Oshkosh vehicles with full throttle and AMX tanks. If I was a Russian soldier seeing these photos, I would be afraid, knowing that T-55s back there are gonna break down and this is the newest tech in the world coming my way. Look at this photo, we covered this in the last video, but I have to go back to it because it's such a big topic. Ukrainian forces crossing the Dnipro River. As I mentioned, all of this area right over the Dnipro River is a swamp. It's a very hard place to protect and a very hard place to attack and a very hard place to keep. Ukrainian special forces have been conducting raids into this area for about 3 to 4 months, maybe more, but the information just surfaced, so everybody's going crazy about it. I'm here to say calm down, this has been happening for a long time. The thing that has been changed is that Ukrainian special forces have made some solid positions there that if Russians would want to take these areas back, it would be very difficult for them. But it would also be very difficult for Ukrainians to strike from these positions, because you cannot funnel anything through it. Any lasting strike would need a logistic chain, and funneling logistics through this swampy area is very difficult with the bridge being destroyed. But if this continues, slowly and slowly Ukrainian special forces might claim more and more land, getting some dry land and some roads perhaps. You know, roads, dry, easy to transport, logistics. Then Russians might have an issue. So this has the potential of growing into something bigger, which right now it's not. It's not something huge. It's not the counteroffensive. Time will tell if Ukrainians will push in this direction. What is odd though is that Russians are really trying to disprove this information. It was the Russian military bloggers that started stating that Ukrainians have crossed the Dnipro River. It wasn't the Ukrainian military bloggers, it was the Russian ones. And now we have another video of Russian troops claiming to be on the site that the Ukrainians crossed and stating that there's nothing here, don't panic. They're really trying to discredit this information. Why? Why is it so important to them? Because they're afraid of the panic it might endorse in their lines. Russian troops have low morale. Low morale is easy to push the panic. And Russians are really working hard to disprove this information. That means the initiative is on the Ukrainian side in the information war. Initiative meaning who is the aggressor and who is the reactor. Ukrainians haven't even confirmed anything. It was a gossip that came from the Russian military bloggers, and now Russian army units themselves are trying to discredit the Russian military bloggers. That means they're so conflicted, they don't know what to believe, they have so much different information. Ukrainians are just silent and watching the game. All the initiative is in their hands. It's beautiful to watch. In the information war, Russia has really fallen behind. It really started to explode yesterday on the left bank of the Dnipro. On this map you can see the settlement the explosion happened in, and you can almost make a line. Ukrainians just bombarded everything that had Russian military written on it. Stara Spurivka, Kola Pristan, Kardashinka, or was it Kardashinka? Kim Kardashinka? They have their own village in Ukraine. Oh god. I may be offended all of the Kardashinka villagers right now. The fact that Ukrainians are so active with their artillery and air force bombarding these targets means that the counteroffensive is coming. It's coming very soon, because last time it was the same pattern. Ukrainian artillery was more active, destroyed the high-value targets, and boom, suddenly we see a few brigades of Ukrainian troops storming the Russian defensive lines, collapsing the lines. Now we have a very interesting video to watch. Yes, everybody knows Wagner private military company, but that's not the only one fighting in Ukraine. That's the biggest one right now with the state contracts. But in Russia, big state-run companies have started to make their own private military companies, private armies. Because when things go south in Ukraine, that means things go south in Russia. That means who has the biggest private army will have the power. That's why everybody wants a private army in Russia, but it's very expensive, so only the biggest companies can allow it to themselves. In Ukraine, there are two big private military companies from Russia fighting right now. There are more smaller ones, these are the major ones. One is Wagner and the other one is Gazprom, the Russian energy giant, Gazprom's private military company. And in this video, these two companies, mercenaries, are, fighting each other. There's a conflict. Gazprom's fighters complained to Putin directly that they were sent to replace Wagner's positions, but were forced to retreat under Ukrainian heavy assaults, and the Wagnerites threatened to shoot them if they retreat. And also, this video has Prigozhin in it, so you get your daily dose of clowning. So get your popcorn, be comfy, let's watch the clowns have it down.
Товарищ Верховный Главнокомандующий, сегодня, 20 апреля 2023 года, к вам обращается личный состав добровольческого батальона.
So this is the Potok, is one of the battalions in the Gazprom's private military company.
Который сформирован из сотрудников ведомственной охраны ПАО «Газпром». Руководство ПАО «Газпром» заверяло нас в том, что мы заключим контракт с Министерством обороны Российской Федерации. Но личный состав батальона «Поток» вынудили подписать соглашение на выполнение служебных заданий с ООО «Редут» уже после входа в зону специальной военной операции 3 апреля 2023 года. Личный состав ЧВК «Вагнер» покинул боевые позиции на линии соприкосновения, так как руководство батальона «Поток» приняло позиции под свое командование. 17 апреля 2023 года в результате атаки ВСУ на позиции батальона «Поток» были потеряны 2 позиции в связи с плохим обеспечением.
Again, we see the poor supply of ammunition. In Russia, ammunition flows to the company that has the highest power, the highest pull, which is Prigozhin right now. Prigozhin has more ammunition than the Russian armed forces. He has connections. Everybody else is left in the dry. Everybody needs ammunition, but only he gets it because he is striking Bakhmut, and Putin wants Bakhmut. So seems like Gazprom PMC is left out of the loop with ammunition.
Боекомплектом, огневым прикрытием, минометным огнем, безответственным отношением к выполнению своих обязанностей руководства батальона «Поток». Командование ЧВК «Вагнер», узнав об этой ситуации, в агрессивной форме с угрозами расправы над личным составом батальона «Поток» блокировал отход с линии боевого соприкосновения и запретил ротацию, не выпускает личный состав в безопасную зону.
All right, let's see what Prigozhin has to say about this. Wagner is notorious. Everybody in front of their guns and in between Ukrainian forces and in front of their guns is stuck. They cannot move. Is it the prisoners? Is it some Russian troops, Mobiks, or now Gazprom's PMC troops? They cannot go back. Wagner is not letting anybody retreat. Only way you can go back from there is a coffin. That's how Prigozhin rolls.
Главная сегодняшняя проблема, которая существует с ЧВК в частности. Для того, чтобы каким-то образом разбавить ЧВК «Вагнер», для того, чтобы это не была одна большая сила, которая может сыграть какую-то роль на внутренней политике. Ну и первое, а второе, всем же говорится о том, что когда-то будет борьба за власть.
Yes, even Prigozhin knows it. If things are going south in Ukraine, then things are going south in Russia. And there will be a fight for power, will be a power vacuum. And who can fill that? The one who has the most punch. Which will be Shoigu, with his army, Wagner with his army, or Gazprom's with his army, or some oligarchs with their, military contractors. Who has the most punch? Everybody knows it. Russian rich oligarchs and the power men are gearing for this internal conflict, because it will come.
Всем нужно свою частную армию иметь. Поэтому те люди, которые имеют деньги, они считают, что это офигенная тема сейчас собрать ЧВК. И поэтому начинают плодиться ЧВК, газпромовские, поток, который мы голубой поток называем.
Голубой поток, it's not blue поток, it's Голубой means gay in Russia, or like a very bad F word, like gay. It's a big insult, so obviously he's salty about it, he don't like it.
Всякие ЧВК Бокарева, ЧВК Редуты и так далее. Каждой твари попали.
I don't know about you, but I love seeing salty Prigozhin. He's like a clown. He's like a small kid about it. I don't like it. I don't want it. Everybody start doing it now. He was the OG private military company in Russia, but now it's everywhere because things are getting out of hand, and everyone who has money and power needs to get ready to grab more power when the power vacuum comes in Russia, and it will come. Putin will lose his grip. This is a military depot in northern Crimea. It was filled with Russian armor, Russian tanks, ACPs, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery, and in 3 months they have emptied the whole thing. And there was a lot A lot. Enough to, start an assault from one direction. Where did all of this military equipment go? I don't know. Perhaps they're getting ready for the Ukrainian assaults and putting it in the fronts, on the fronts, or into the reserves, closer to the fronts. I don't know where it went. If you know, put it in the comments. Where did it go? Maybe some Russian general decided to make a lot of money and it's like, I don't know where they went, but I got a new villa in my backyard. The United States House of Representatives is going to consider a resolution demanding the return of Ukraine to the borders of 1991. In addition, the document calls the Ukrainian accession into NATO and also requires Russia to pay reparations. Now, it's a great document because if this goes through, the United States will have a political document that guides them towards a peace in Ukraine. This can be used to make a coalition to push for a peace that includes Ukraine with the borders of 1991. But one of you answered this. Ukraine has a zero chance of getting into NATO until the war is over and they fix their corruption. It is a pointless debate in the present time. It is kind of a taboo in the West to talk about Ukrainian corruption or shortfallings right now, but here's my take on it. What about Ukrainian accession into NATO? Well, first of all, let's look at the requirements there is to a country to be accepted into NATO. There's a webpage for that. According to the study, countries seeing NATO membership would have to be able to demonstrate that they have fulfilled certain requirements. These include a functioning democratic political system based on a market economy. Ukraine has issues with this. There's nothing else about corruption, but this already includes the issue about corruption because a functioning democratic society has minor corruption. EU has corruption, but compared to Ukraine, it's minor. Ukraine has a major corruption issue, a big enough of an issue that it affects their democratic political system. The fair treatment of minority populations, unfortunately, Ukraine does not have that. Ukraine has politically been a very old school country. A marriage between a man and a woman, gay minorities not being accepted. We're not even touching the point of other ethnicities. This has been an issue in Ukraine. These 2 points already would need a lot of work, and these cannot be fixed when the country is at war because the priorities are elsewhere, the money goes elsewhere, the focus is elsewhere. These 2 points need a lot of time. A commitment to the peaceful resolution of conflicts. I think we don't have an issue with that. Ukraine is fighting a defensive war. This is against offensive wars. The ability and willingness to make military contribution to NATO operations, I don't think there's an issue with that also. A commitment to a democratic civil military relations and institutional structures. That means that the military is under a very strong civil control. That means military does not run the country, but a civil politician runs the country. And if the civil politicians are elected by democratic people, then military fulfills the orders and the wishes of the people. This also might be an issue in Ukraine. My take is that Ukraine has a very big potential to become a NATO member and the EU member, but both of these institutions need Ukraine to do a lot of work, so much work, and some of the work that cannot be done until the war is over because there's just money and the focus goes elsewhere. So if Ukraine wants to get into EU and in NATO, this war has to be won. Number one, this is the first point at all. We cannot talk about anything else before this happens. And after that, there has to be a continuation of this work. The acknowledgement of these problems, these issues, for example, corruption, a very big corruption problem, and the solvement of these issues. When this war ends, we will see how Ukraine will react to these issues. But as of now, I think, yes, we can only talk about Ukrainian accession into NATO in the future terms. And I think it might take a decade. And this is coming from a Ukrainian supporter. I'm not against it, I'm all for it, but this is how it is. It's quite tough to get into these institutions. Now we have an intercepted call translated by Dmitry. There was a Russian kamikaze tank convoy in Vuhledar a few months ago. It was disastrous, all of the tanks were destroyed. As I mentioned before, Russians used their tanks without infantry support, and these tanks it was a turkey shoot. This call talks about this convoy. How the Russians felt inside this convoy. I really want to know.
Мы тут сидим под носом укропов. У нас сегодня ночка была пиздец. С БТР хуярили. И так хуярили прострел. Я вчера видел трассер, где-то в метре на уровне головы от меня пролетел. Тут вчера так хуячили, ебать, то с артиллерии, сапогов, блядь, там.
Ну, видимо, они получили подкреп.
Конечно. А ты слышала от этого, то, что в Угледаре, блядь, хуярили нашу колонну, ребят?
Нет, не слушала.
No, I haven't. Of course they haven't. I think I get the information before Putin does. Putin's information circle and the Russian leaders, the information is very slow there, and they only want to hear good news. So they don't really get it. I think you, the Western viewer, might get this information of the Russian losses before the Russian leaders do, because it's being sugar-coated and watered down, and they don't get it. That's not how the information moves there.
Вот, позавчера, по-моему, тут Жеки звонит, жена. Угледаром колонна наших ребят, полностью шишиги, блядь, полностью мальчишек, внутри танки. Блядь, вся эта колонна сожгли нахуй. Там столько, говорит, людей, говорит, погибло, 200-х. Как вот понял, в Чечню, в Афганистане,
Я
когда,
поняла.
когда колонна, она звонит, ревет, Женя, ты, говорит, точно, говорит, не там. Он говорит, да нет, успокойся, блядь, говорит, такая же, говорит, мальчишек, столько, говорит, погибло, ебать. Нас тут людей все меньше, блядь.
Да, ну это понятно, это вообще.
Мы уже здесь и так каждый день, блядь, понял, со смерти играем. Вчера еще одного задвухсотила напрочь. Ну, не задвухсотил, полголовы нету, ну хуй его знает. Есть он сейчас живой, нет. 1-2 человека, допустим, это, блядь, как говорится, горе, блядь. А когда уже сотни, это уже статистика. Вот есть такая статистика просто. Все ребята уже в ахуе, и наши, и дончане.
It's well said. It's just a statistics for the Russians. For Putin, it's not even a statistics. He doesn't get this information about the losses because he's known not to like the negative information, bad news. So they just don't give him the losses. They just give him the few meters they gain in Bakhmut because that's good news. They don't tell him how much they lost gaining these few meters. And this soldier here knows it. We are a statistic.
А это тепловизоры вам дошли?
Ну, какие тепловизоры, Коль? Тут все поджимали. Тут, я тебе говорю, здесь, знаешь, ОПГ. Ну, бандюганы, нахуй.
Bandits, but from Donetsk, yes, the People's Republican Army of Donetsk and Luhansk, they are run like a criminal organization. They're not, these armies, yes, they might have their hierarchy, but they're run like a mafia. And everything is taken, even from the Russian army. If there are no Spetsnaz or no Rosgvardia present, these bandits from Donetsk, they will take everything. And they will sell it. They don't even give it to their own army. They will just sell it. It's all about the money there.
Только Донецкая, походу, ОПГ. Я вообще, блядь, такого мнения, нахуй, что здесь те же самые укронацисты у нас, нахуй, блядь, под командованием Триколора, нахуй.
Hey, yeah, we're hearing the truth. I'm telling you, I've told it before, the best and the fastest way for a Russian man to get de-propagandized, you know, to get rid of the propaganda in their head that has been put there for 20 years, is to go to the front, because then they see the real Russian world. We have the same Ukronazis here under the Russian flag. I'm telling you, perhaps we're fighting for the wrong people. You heard it right here, my friends. But unfortunately, they get to know the truth, and then they will die. So no use of it.
Мы просто, сука, не за тех воюем. Может, наши с другой, блядь, стороны, нахуй, порой кажется, нахуй. Потому что здесь такие команды, блядь, просто бестолковые. Идите, похуй, ебать, копайте, пока не сдохнете. У нас, блядь, как ты знаешь, мы в блокаде, блядь, ни воды, ни хлеба, нахуй, порой. Ночью, блядь, лед разбиваем, грызем, блядь. Нас должны были увезти сейчас под ротацию. А у нас комбат сказал, нахуй, не надо никого выводить, нихуя. Пускай воюют. Так что, блядь, нам шансов отсюда, блядь, даже до марта полгода, блядь, дожить, хуй его знает. Что тут они, блядь, весь полк 70, он въебаный, он нахуй никому не нужен. И они просто когда заходили в феврале или в марте, первые начинали, у них здесь очень духовая было 200-х, понял, что, и потом все за 500-лись, то бишь отказники, нахуй, кто контракты прозрывали, то что, нахуй, и все. И этот полк, короче, он стал уебаным, нахуй, штрафным, блядь, как бы у него вообще бы флаг не забрали, нахуй.
The sad reality is these troops who go to fight for Russia, even volunteers or 6-month contractors, as you saw from here, they will find out the truth in the front lines. They will find out they have been living in the lie, and the Putin's propaganda is an empty shell, and it all falls down there. They find out the truth, and they cannot do anything about it because the Wagner troops behind them or Rosgvardia will point their guns and say fight until you die, dig until you die, so it's no use. If you have read the book 1984, it has the same ending. Just before the end, you will find out the truth, and then they will kill you. Egypt has picked a side. It's now selling ammunition to Ukrainians. This is huge because Egypt has one of the biggest stockpiles of Soviet ammunition and weaponry. If I say one of the biggest, they have a lot. They have enough to keep Ukrainian Soviet weaponry running for a long time. This is a photo of what Egypt could potentially send without losing their defensive capabilities. We're talking about 1,000 T-55 tanks modernized, 1,000 plus BMPs. They even have about 300 M113s. But more important than these ACPs and infantry fighter vehicles is the ammunition, the artillery shells. This is what Ukraine needs the most. And if Egypt is ready to send them, then Ukraine will have better off with artillery munitions than Russia. Now we'll watch a fun video that comes from the Russian propaganda show, and it speaks the truth again. You know, my pattern is that I pick these shows from Russian propaganda TV, and I pick the part when they speak the truth, because they sometimes do. But nobody believes it, because their people have been geared not to believe anything.
Вот лучше бы в наших интересах было бы, чтобы Китай и дальше толдычил свою песню про Организацию Объединенных Наций, вот, про международное законодательство. Потому что как только китайцы всерьез начнут поминать регулярно про какие-то исторические права, ну, считайте, что нам на дальневосточных границах снова, как и в 70-е годы.
Russia doesn't have to really guard a Chinese border. I mean, they have troops there, but very few. I mean, China could really roll over the Russians right now if they wanted to. If China would really have an idea to take back Siberian lands that they used to historically own, historically occupy, Russia wouldn't have these troops to take anywhere. Russia would have to fortify the Russia-China border again with troops they don't have. They don't have the military equipment for this. So, and they cannot do anything. They can only hope that China doesn't get any ideas, because if they do, Russia is screwed. There's no antidote for it. They cannot even handle Ukraine. I mean, how could they handle China? And Finland, for example. Finland is in NATO. They're not going to man that border. They don't have the troops.
Года придется разворачивать 1,5-миллионную армию. По одной простой причине. По одной простой причине. Посмотрите там краткую историческую справку, как Россия приросла Преамурьем. Вообще, как Дальний Восток появился в составе Российской империи. Вот. Вас ждет много увлекательного и интересного.
Yeah, this guy knows his history, and I don't think Putin likes the way he speaks. But he speaks the truth here. My friends, thank you for watching. I enjoy making these videos for you guys, and I'll keep you in the loop of what's going on in Ukraine, especially with the upcoming counter-offensive. If you like my style and if you like my channel, then the fastest and most efficient way to support is Patreon. It's in the description below. Also, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Until my next video, Slava Ukraini.